Can you hear me? This is Cristobal Cobo, Senior Education Technology Specialist at the World Bank. Delighted to be with you today. We're going to talk about hybrid learning. But first of all, let me remind you that you can download this presentation from this QR code. As you will see, we will explore a little bit of what we understand about hybrid learning, why we think it's important, and some of the key components as well, some guidance to choose the right technology. We're going to explore some country frameworks, and finally, we will give some ideas on monitoring. All that in 10 minutes. So the first thing is to understand that for us, hybrid learning is a compound concept that integrates face-to-face learning with either blended learning, distance learning, remote learning, but ensuring that there is going to be learning continuity regardless of the context where the learning is taking place. We as humans learning in every context, but we don't learn the same when we are reading than when we are discussing. So understanding the nuances of that is going to be very, very important. Now, hybrid learning is really a tool for the future to embrace whatever disruption that could be sanitary disruption, environmental one, any political conflict, or climate refugees that unfortunately is something that we will see more and more in the future. Now, during the pandemic, we saw a lot of implementation of technologies for countries while they were implementing remote learning. So with higher, lower level of synchronous or asynchronous, with more advanced or less advanced technology, there were a lot of options. But in many cases, we saw that the real human component, the interaction between the student and the teacher, was something that was really hindered during the pandemic. So that's why we think it's so important to emphasize the idea of REM, retention, motivation, and engagement. Now, we have this idea of hybrid learning, of this combination, as we said, between in-person and different models of remote learning. Now, you will see that the remote learning will be adjust depending on the where it's taking place, when it's taking place, and how, either one-to-one, one-to-few, or many-to-many. Now, we have very, let's say, more classical or basic models of hybrid learning, for instance, when we combine the in-person face-to-face classroom with the use of some kind of LMS. The second would be the flex model that we call, when with regular schooling, with the use of some changes in the environments that are already prescribed, which is part of the learning journey that the teacher will design. And we have more advanced levels of hybrid when the schooling is happening really in different spaces. This is what we call a la carte, and the student will have higher level of agency to choose depending on the need, on what is being learned, what is the more appropriate environment, and all the conditions are in place. However, it's really important to take into account there are a number of enabling factors that need to be considered. We need to have clarity on the vision, why we want to provide that hybrid learning. What are the adaptations that we're going to do to the curriculum? What is the appropriate technology for using that? I'm going to get back to that in a minute. And how we adapt the contents to this learning scenario. Now, teachers also, we know that the traditional training of digital skills for teachers is not going to be enough to prepare them to navigate in this multi-contextual learning. In the same way, the pedagogies need to be adapted, and a lot of support will need to be designed for the students in every step of the way. That's why the monitoring is going to be critical, not only to ensure attention, but also retention along the process. Now, there are a few components that I think is important to ask. Number one, do the students have the appropriate connectivity and infrastructure? Are the contents adapted to be learned in these different settings? To what extent, what are the transformations that we're going to do with the curriculum? In terms of digital proficiency for students, teachers, and also for parents, do they have what they need? Do they need any extra support? So in that way, as you see, depending on the context, the students will have higher level of agency, but at the same time, the system will have to design strategies for providing support every step of the way. So when we understand that the learners will be learning in different contexts, we need to understand that they won't be learning in the same way in different environments. So different outcomes in different contexts is something that we have to factor in from the design. Now, regarding what kind of technology, that will be the result of analyzing the availability, the broadband, and with those components, we can choose what is the level of interaction that the students and the teachers may have when they talk to each other. If there's low access to broadband and interaction and connectivity, probably that might affect the regular interaction between the teacher and the student. We have to design strategies to to overcome that, maybe bringing a more active role of the parents, and they may need additional support and guidance to move in that direction. When the access is available, certainly we can design strategies to have a much more regular follow-up with the students. Now, it doesn't exist the perfect technology. Depending on the context, the technology will be more or less appropriate. And I think it's important to emphasize that every technological arrangement will have benefits and weaknesses. So when we use, for instance, radio and television, the value is the access is broader, but at the same time, the level of engagement might be lower when there's no possibility of asking or getting some kind of feedback. At the same time, if we move along the way and we bring the phones, happily, we can have higher levels of interaction with the students that might be synchronous or asynchronous, depending on the context, right? And when we have access to digital infrastructure, we not only have access to interaction, but also we can offer much more customized learning experience or personalized learning experience when we use, for instance, adaptive platforms. So the arrangement will have to be the result of an analysis of these components. Now, when we design a learning experience, it's going to be very important that whatever lesson we deploy, we have to ask ourselves two questions, an horizontal and a vertical one. The horizontal one is when we take a lesson and we separate the lesson in different learning activities, what part of those lessons should be learned in person? What activities can be done remotely, either synchronous or asynchronous? When we have done that pedagogical adaptation, then we can ask ourselves, what is the most appropriate technology for offering that? The advice will be to offer different channels to secure that those students who might have less access to the infrastructure might have alternative ways of navigating. So when we explore different countries, we have seen, for instance, in the case of Japan, that the combination of in-person plus the use of LMS is a way of enhancing what is happening at the classroom level. However, also it's true that the teacher will be the one who will be designing the whole learning route. Now, in the case of Singapore, we have identified a much more flex approach, the rotation stations, if you want, right? Where the student will be learning in different spaces. There will be a much more personalized learning experience, but the truth is the teacher will still be very relevant in every step of the way. Now, in more advanced levels of hybrid, for instance, a la carte or self-blend, every single space is well appropriated for enabling the learning experience of the students. The student will have higher level of agency. The student will regularly touch base with the teacher, but the teacher won't be the only source of accessing the contents because the student will be in collaboration with the teacher, right? So along the way, the assessment will change depending on the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Now, I think it's important to have a kind of checklist of the key components that we have to consider when we implement hybrid learning. For instance, do we have a clear vision? Can we double check if the students have access to connectivity in the classroom and at home? Are the teachers well prepared with the tools to enable a student-centered learning? And if that's the case, what are the channels for regular feedback? How are we gonna are teachers going to be able to adjust the learning activity to the needs of the student? And at the same time, are the contents adapted to this different context and to the age of the learner? So all these components will help the students to have a much more self-regulated learning experience with higher levels of agency, but that won't happen suddenly. That will be the result of providing tools and guidance on learning how to do that. But every component of the ones that I've been mentioning will be the result of an appropriate regular monitoring to be sure that these components are in place. So the suggestion is to consider monitoring the principles, whether the access, the relevance, the quality, and the equity are in place. The components in terms of infrastructure, the technical support, the instruments and the channels needed for the communication, and as well as the capacities. Are the capacities being developed, the cognitive capacities, the social-emotional capacities, and as well as the technical ones needed to navigate within all these tools. And finally, let me share 5 key ideas that I think can help us to move forward in the discussion. 1, hybrid learning is not only about flexibility, but it's overall a possibility to offer new levels of resilience for a very challenging environment in which many of us are working. Number 2, EdTech. The EdTech Readiness Index is an instrument offered by the World Bank to help countries to do a quick screening and monitoring of what is the EdTech context, what is the EdTech situation at the system level, to what extent technology is supporting the learning experience. And in that way, I think it's very important to consider this kind of early mapping to take decisions. Number 3, permanent adaptation. Since there's not a single kind of hybrid learning, it will be very important to adjust and regulate the pedagogies, the contents, depending on the age and the proficiency of the students and the teachers to move along the way. And REM, retention, motivation, and engagement, will be a critical factor to secure that the learners are not in isolation, not at home and not in the classroom. And finally, mitigations. We need to secure that the support is available when the students or the parents might need extra guidance or extra help. These components will be critical for a very successful implementation. So a big thank you to all of you in all the languages that hopefully can be of relevance, and I hope this lesson was of interest for you.